Welcome to this lecture on capital allowances. Capital allowances is one of the most important sections that you'll be studying, guaranteed to come up in the exam and your test. It influences things like recoupments and also your capital gains tax calculations. And basically what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at a situation where a taxpayer purchases an asset and then they get capital allowances from SARS. Now, remember, the capital allowances are all deductions from your taxable income. And why do we get capital allowances? Why? Because if you look at the general deduction formula, right, the general deduction formula in section 11A tells you may not claim a deduction for capital assets. Now, why is that important for us? It is important that you see that this is what they tell us in the general deduction formula. So we are not allowed to claim capital assets as a deduction. That's why they then had to go and give us capital allowances in order to claim deductions. Because if a company goes and they spend 10 million rands on a machine that is going to help produce them income, we are going to be taxing them on the income. So we also need to give them the benefit of claiming tax deductions for the cost that they incur. So not just only your running expenses, your operating expenses, but also your capital expenditure, you can get most of the time, not always, capital allowances on. So you'll see in this, we're going to basically be looking at a situation where a person purchases an asset. Most of the time they purchase the asset, there are exceptions, but most of the time they're the owner of the asset, and then they can claim a capital allowance on that. Right. The only exception is section 12 in for no's, where if you lease an asset from the government and you make improvements to it, you can claim deductions on it. Right, so most of the other times you'll see you have to be the owner. So an important section for us, guys. Now, as I've already mentioned, this is a deduction. So if you look at our income tax framework, we are now sitting in this deductions and allowances section still. We have now already studied the general deduction formula, we studied the special deductions, and now we are going to be looking at capital allowances in this specific lecture. Right, so very, very important, as you see, we are going to be focusing on deductions. Now guys, and you need to understand these deductions and these capital allowances. If you don't know how to do that, then you also can't do recoupments, which is a very, very important part. Okay, so let's start looking at the capital allowances.